Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for being with us today. Last November, there were a number of historic wins across the country in the general election, including 2 women elected governor in New Jersey and Virginia, bringing the total of women leading states in the U.S. at the same time to 14, a record high. Other historic wins included the first Muslim woman elected to statewide office in the U.S. in Virginia, the first Muslim elected mayor in New York City, and the first woman elected mayor of Detroit. All of those wins were for the Democratic Party. This year, Ohio has the chance to make history with the 2 major candidates running for Ohio governor from both parties. On the Republican side, the leading candidate, who in a unique move has already been endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party and President Donald Trump ahead of the primary election, is entrepreneur and former presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He would be the first person of Indian descent and Hindu faith elected governor in the state of Ohio. Now, on the Democratic side, the only candidate running is Dr. Amy Acton, a physician who served as the former state health director, and she would be the first woman elected governor and the first person of Jewish faith if elected in Ohio. Late last year, we had conversations with both candidates, and as the primary election approaches, we're resharing those conversations today. If you can believe it, military and overseas absentee voting begins on March 20th, with early in-person voting starting April 7th. First, we'll hear from Dr. Amy Acton, and then from Vivek Ramaswamy. Since this conversation was pre-recorded, we can't take your call, but please email us your thoughts at soi@ideastream.org. You can also message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, here's my conversation with Dr. Amy Acton. Dr. Acton, what is it that you take away from what happened in this November election when we saw 2 Democratic women making history? That was in Virginia and New Jersey with those governor wins.
Right. Well, it was an historic night. It was exciting to watch not just these amazing 2 women governors be elected, but also locally. I was spending election night in Cincinnati. I'd spent the day going to different poll locations and finally wrapped up in the headquarters when Aftab won, Mayor Aftab prevailed. And I can tell you that what I was hearing all night were school boards were flipping in directions that people were thrilled about. I heard the same thing in Youngstown and other parts of the state. I think a lot of folks are ready for change, and they want to see public servants again, people who actually solve problems instead of making them.
In Virginia and New Jersey, both of those women won in blue or purple leaning states. Now, Ohio has been trending redder and redder. So what is it about the state right now that makes you see a path to winning the governorship in Ohio? Since Virginia and New Jersey, those electorates are a lot different than ours.
You know, actually, I've been going everywhere around Ohio for almost 2 years now, listening deeply everywhere I go. And we've been seeing record crowds of folks, and it doesn't know party. I can't say this enough. Ohio is a very independent thinking state. We actually have very high numbers of independents. And that's why you see something like Obama win, then Trump win. And what I am actually hearing from people on the ground, and that's what I think we saw in these more local elections in Ohio on last Tuesday, is that people are wanting change. You know, people are overwhelmed from the chaos and the vitriol and all the things that we've been seeing going on, and they're really wondering why no one is dealing with costs and affordability and the issues they face in their everyday life. You know, Ohioans are talking about things like what you and I probably feel, our energy bills going up. They're talking about gas and groceries, but they're talking about childcare and housing being affordable and being able to age in place with dignity. You know, I see Ohio, you know, obviously we've been very gerrymandered, so we have this sense that we're this very divided state. But when I'm on the ground, I'm seeing a lot of Ohioans probably speaking mostly of the same things.
When we do think about party identity, though, you know, you're running as the Democratic candidate. Right now, the only person declared in the Democratic side of things. Is there something different than you do to try to appeal to the Republican and the independent identified voters, or is it the same?
Well, I would say I'm running the same way I would always run and solve problems. You know, I'm a doctor. I'm not a lifelong politician. I'm certainly not a pundit on all of the things that have happened in our state. But I know Ohioans a little differently. A bond formed from something we went through together, and that bond doesn't seem to know party. What I'm seeing are everyday Ohioans longing for public servants, again, who actually do the work and make our lives better.
Let's talk about that bond. You know, you came to a lot of people's attention in your role as the director of
Yes.
Ohio Department of Health during the pandemic. And, you know, a lot of people found you to be a steady voice during that time. And since that time, we have seen a lot of backlash and skepticism about mask and vaccine mandates, especially from people on the right. So what do you say to voters who may have soured on the medical establishment in the years since then?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that that is not what I'm hearing on the ground. Again, we keep seeing these record crowds of folks showing up. And, you know, what we talk about is, you know, specifically to COVID, you know, I'm very proud of what happened in the state. I was part of the early emergency response, and, you know, we put people and lives and getting people back to their lives and jobs above politics. And I'm very proud to have been a part of that. You know, Ohioans, we flattened the curve in Ohio. We saved a lot of lives, and we actually opened and got back to life a lot quicker because we took swift and decisive action. You know, as a leader, you know, the way I lead is a little bit, you know, something I've done my whole career, which is I put the hard cards on the table. And I think it's so important. The kinds of problems we're facing, whether it be property taxes or housing, takes being able to know the ground you stand on. I very much trust Ohioans, and I think they really trusted me because I put the hard cards on the table and asked a little more of us. You know, that's what's going to take to lead our state. We're going backwards on nearly every measure. I'm running because people in the state are struggling. They're doing everything right, but special interests and bad actors in our state house keep taking us backwards on every measure in the state. And what I see is people need leaders who are going to bring about change and address the issues we really care about.
Let's bring it back to present day now in the November election. You know, Abigail Spanberger will be Virginia's first female governor. Also flipped Virginia from a Republican governor to a Democratic one. And there's an AP voter poll recently that said 40% of registered voters in New Jersey and Virginia said they cast their ballots in opposition to President Trump. So how much do you think this election and next year's will be decided by what happens on a federal level?
You know, I am very, very laser focused on Ohio and our state house. I keep telling folks, you know, we pay attention to federal, we pay attention to local, but the state house is where a lot of the bad things are happening. And until we fix our state and get good leaders, and they're good leaders, quite frankly, on both sides of the aisle, who are really there to do the work of the people, it doesn't get better for Ohio. Now, you know, my opponent, you know, very much I feel has no sense of these everyday issues we're facing, you know, about costs, about affordability, about, you know, our educational system in this state. And I know the president just said something like costs are not the issue, but I can tell you from what I am hearing from Ohioans, absolutely affordability is the number one issue facing Ohioans. And we need leaders who are going to do something about it. And, you know, I'm running against an opponent who said recklessly, like, eliminate all property taxes. But we all know that property taxes have gone up because our state house has been failing us. They cut the local funds. They've cut funding our food banks, our mental health programs, you know, our addiction services. They've cut so many things. And then therefore the local community has had to raise revenue somehow. We actually have to do a comprehensive look at our entire tax policy, and we have to give immediate relief to people with things like the Homestead Exemption Act right now, because we have people aging in the homes they've been in their whole lives, and they just can't keep up. You know, just last week I was in Portage County at a food bank. We had 400 cars come through a food bank, and 65 cars were still waiting, and we ran out of food. We have immediate needs of folks. People are feeling this. This is real. You know, I had a really rough childhood. I've lived a lot of these issues of not having enough to eat, of living in a tent in the winter, of not having the heat turned on. And I understand what this is like. And what I'm up against is a self-funding billionaire who wants to do the same failed policies that have hurt the state for so long. So I'm laser focused on the people of Ohio, and I'm laser focused on this opponent because we really look like we can win this race and start to turn things around.
Now, when you reference your opponent there, you're talking about Vivek Ramaswamy. He is the person who has been endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party as the main candidate who's running on the Republican side. Right now, we are working to secure an interview with Vivek Ramaswamy as well. But right now, you're the only declared Democratic candidate for Ohio governor.
That's right.
So how does that impact your approach to your campaign leading up to the primary in 2026?
You know, I've been laser focused on people, and I can't say enough. I really believe what we're seeing now is people finding their way back to one another, not giving up on one another, and really trying to join arms to push back on these extreme ideologies and special interests and culture wars and all the rest of it that my opponent was very famous running for president on. You know, I've been focused on things like victims. You know, we challenged our opponent to come out and do what he said he would do in the Epstein files. He said he would release them when he was running for president. He's been silent. And I would hope you and others ask him questions about the fact that he won't speak up about that now. You know, as somebody, again, who experienced abuse and neglect as a child and experienced this kind of abuse specifically, I've been fighting for victims my whole life. I think folks like this need to be accountable. If you're not going to stand up for the victims of the most heinous crimes we see, you're certainly not going to stand up against special interests for the rest of us.
Sticking with talking about candidate Ramaswamy right now, who previously ran for president, as you mentioned, and worked shortly with the Trump administration's DOJ department. Following the GOP governor losses in New Jersey and Virginia, he mentioned Zohran Mamdani's win as mayor in New York City. He said it provided two key lessons for the Republican Party. First, that Republicans need to focus on affordability, and second, that Republicans need to cut out identity politics and emphasize that Republicans don't care about the color of your skin or your religion. So what do you think about that approach from Ramaswamy?
Well, as somebody who has been running for 2 years, focused on the needs of Ohioans, I don't find it credible that he is saying this as somebody who literally ran a presidential campaign based on culture wars and pitting people against one another. I can't tell you enough. Everywhere I go, people are exhausted. That's why we're seeing the record numbers, and the polling is absolutely showing that we are far ahead of my opponent in independents, and we're seeing a lot of Republicans crossing over because they too have been listening to his words all these years, and they too know that he is actually doing the same failed policies and promoting the same things that actually got us in this mess. So I think, you know, I'm laser focused truly, and having experienced costs, you know, to say that you care about costs and then spend most of the last year in other states actually with the opponents of the two governors who ran, he looks more like someone who's running for president. He's flying around in a private jet. You know, the cost of that a month is more than most of us make in a year in Ohio. And so I think it's very, very important that folks listen deeply to the people of this state. We've been going everywhere. We've been going places people, quite frankly, haven't been in a while. And that's why we're seeing these crowds that don't know party. I think people are longing for change. And when I say public servants again, you know, I can't say enough. Our job doing this, being governor, is to be for all people. It's to help all people feel safe. It's to help all people have a chance at a good life. My opponent literally took $10 million into a PAC from a guy named Yas in Philadelphia, whose sole goal is to end public schools as we know it. Everywhere I go in Ohio, people are very alarmed. They want to see their public schools thrive. We invented public schools in Ohio. It was a compact. The state was going to be different. In the Northwest Territory, when we chopped up the blocks of land, every so many was for public school because unlike the East Coast, unlike Europe, we were going to make sure everyone had that chance at an education. And literally, we still haven't funded the bipartisan funding plan. My opponent has said literally out loud that he wants to end teachers' unions. I was saved by public schools as a kid. I have the life I have, was able to overcome a lot because of our schools and our libraries. I'm married to a 43-year public school, elementary school teacher and a coach. I don't think this is the kind of policy Ohioans want, and that's why I'm running for governor. I refuse to look the other way while bad actors keep selling us more of these failed policies.
You mentioned the importance of the state house when it comes to what we pay attention to. You know, we pay attention to the federal level, you say, and also the local level, but there's some bad things that are happening at the state level. So You're going to be working with many of the leaders that you're fighting against right now.
Right.
There is a supermajority of Republican
That's
power
right.
in the Ohio legislature. So, how do you do that when you're working against that supermajority if you become governor?
Well, I've been doing this work my entire career. I'm almost 60 years old. I've worked with past governors as well. And obviously, I was willing to work with a Republican governor. You never agree with anyone on every issue, but I'll work with anyone who wants to actually solve the problems of Ohioans. I worked with this president. I worked on uranium leaking in Piketon, Ohio. I worked with this legislature on a number of issues, so much so that even while they were pushing back on some things during COVID, I was receiving well wishes and notes and flowers from people. The thing is, we're going to have to work, and we've got a lot of work to do. Winning is just the beginning of the task ahead. We didn't get here overnight. You know, we have to go after gerrymandering. I think 80% of Ohioans want to end gerrymandering. This was lawless language written last time. I worked with Maureen O'Connor and a bipartisan group of business leaders all over Ohio to end this. We have to go after it in 27 again. If we don't get it there, we go after it in the regular process, because these special interests are having such an influence on state houses. We need good people who want to serve and actually solve the problems of Ohioans back in. And that doesn't know party. It's about people who actually want to do the work.
When you talk about the issues that you're fighting against that have come to fruition here in Ohio because of the longstanding Republican leadership, what are those issues specifically? What are your top priorities?
You know, my priorities of, of course, healthcare being affordable. Right now, in many parts of our state, you have to go an hour and 15 minutes to deliver a baby, to have a cavity filled for your kid. Our rural hospitals are collapsing. Our urban here, right here in Cleveland, Metro Health is struggling right now. These Medicaid cuts, we need governors pushing back on that. But governors on both sides of the aisle are doing things like relieving medical debt, which is the largest cause of bankruptcy. Many folks struggle with the fact that one illness can wipe out everything that you have. You know, schools are be something you'll absolutely see me fighting for. Most parts of the state only have public schools. It's the center of the way of life. It is where healthcare and other things are happening, mental health for children right now. The economy, I absolutely believe that we could do a much better job of diversifying our economy. The state house has not worked on any of the cost issues that we care about. They didn't work on getting ahead of the new power electric grid thing that we're dealing with right now. We've had a very corrupt PUCO. They're not getting ahead of the corruption and promoting the Consumers Council. We're not actually making the AI companies bringing the big data centers in to make sure that they pay for this electricity, not the consumers, we the people of Ohio. But the thing is, they don't work on any of this stuff because they say they're working on the economy. But our growth in GDP in Ohio is 45th. Our unemployment is 45th right now, and our biggest export is young people. And these culture wars they're doing is absolutely adding to this. We actually need to realize that trickle-down economics doesn't work. It's been disproven by economists worldwide that economies are actually built from communities up. We need to be empowering our communities, our local communities again, instead of doing everything we can to make their job harder.
Looking ahead to next year's election, you know, last year, Sherrod Brown lost in the Senate race to Bernie Moreno. He's running again for the U.S. Senate again. So what does that mean to your campaign to have a recognizable Democratic face on the ballot? Have there been any conversations there? Will you be working together at all to get the Democratic vote out?
You know, everywhere I go, I've been very focused on people, and people are hungry for change. I think what we saw in the two state elections here in Ohio, not in Virginia or New Jersey or anywhere else, but here in Ohio, were a very good sign of what is to come. You know, everywhere I've been in Cincy, where I was election night, to Youngstown and other communities here in Cleveland, all I'm hearing about are about school board races, about, you know, library levies that passed. People don't like the policies of the State House, and they really are longing for change. I can't say enough. We've had record crowds showing up. We've set records in fundraising 3 quarters in a row. And I am not a career politician. You know, I'm a career public servant and a doctor and a mom. And the interesting number we have is we had a record number of donors. We've had more donors in the first half of this year than most candidates ever see statewide in 2 years running. We are seeing a groundswell from every county, and this is small dollar too. It's people who are wanting change. And I can't say enough. I'm thrilled about what we're seeing and what we're going to be able to do in this election. And obviously, there's been a lot of polling done as well. We now know the latest polling has us a point ahead of Vivek Ramaswamy. We're actually beating him by 19 points in a Bowling Green poll. In independents, and a poll teachers did, we are plus 21. He's underwater 14 points with independents. I see that people are longing for something different, and I can't say enough. I'm honored and privileged to have served this state, and I will be so privileged as to serve it again.
Now, right now, you are the only declared Democratic candidate for
Yes.
the governor office in the state of Ohio. There have been rumblings that someone like former U.S. Representative Tim Ryan may enter the race. Does that impact the campaign that you've been running up to this point?
No, well, it's certainly not up to this point. And, I can't speak to what Tim Ryan would do, but I can tell you, the numbers are very favorable in this campaign as well. And I'm just staying very, very focused on my opponent, Mr. Ramaswamy, and the people who I believe in October of 26 are going to help me tell him, you cannot buy the state, you cannot buy Ohio, and you can't buy us.
Let's look ahead to that election next year in 2026. Final question for you as we wrap things up today. The government shutdown was top of mind for voters this November. Last year, it was immigration and the economy. And we mentioned, the Sherrod Brown race. Every anti-Sherrod Brown ad was focused on anti-transgender issues. What do you think will be the most pressing issue that voters will care about a year from now?
I believe, just as they do now, costs are top of mind on everything, affordability. And you know what? I've shared a lot about this saying that a whole generation of young people all over this country that are Gen Alpha, they're middle schoolers right now, have a new slang saying that is so Ohio. And it doesn't mean something good as we can imagine. It means cringy and weird and backwards. This is a legacy that has come to us by a dysfunctional state house for many, many years that has not been working for Ohioans. We have a candidate that is not going to be working on the policies that I believe Ohioans are longing for us to work on. I will be fighting every day, not just to stop the bad things that have been happening, and they've been many, but we can actually dream of good things again. I think we've been living in a please don't do more harm, while everyday Ohioans are just trying to make ends meet. They're doing everything right. My opponent says people are struggling because they're lazy, they're mediocre, they're not working hard enough. That is absolutely not the Ohioans I meet every day. And as a person who knows what it feels like to have struggled in life and had the good fortune of people not looking the other way, at that eventually being able to be removed from bad things, I think we're living through a time where all of us are being asked to have a little more courage. All of us are being asked to stand up against these bad actors. And I believe what we're doing at actonforgovernor.com, we are literally bringing Ohioans together. We do these Zooms once a month where we huddle. We give you great ideas of what you can be doing to not look the other way in your own community, because together, I believe Ohioans are going to push back on this, and they're going to say, you can't buy this state. We want to live in a state where everyone feels welcome, where everyone belongs, and we can have nice things. Like, we literally in this state are on the verge of being able to be the largest integrated park system in this country. We've been cleaning up the Great Lake. We've been cleaning up our rivers. We have bike trails, and I drive a Jeep trails everywhere in this state. The Ohio River just became a designated national water trail. But literally, we can actually dream of things like that kind of quality of life again, where we can take all our assets, and that is a huge economic driver for us to have something like that. So look, I'm going to reduce costs. That is the first thing I will be going in every way, whether it's energy or healthcare costs, what we can do with housing, what we can do with energy, all of it. But I also want us to know that we should actually expect of our leaders to deliver great things again. And I'll fight tirelessly every step of this way.
Dr. Acton, thank you very much for your time, Democratic candidate for the Ohio governorship.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. Thank you.
Again, that was Dr. Amy Acton, the Democratic candidate for governor of Ohio. Well, We'll take a quick break now, and then when we return, we'll share my conversation with the leading GOP candidate for Ohio governor, Vivek Ramaswamy. You're listening to The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're back with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for being with us today. We're spending today's show focusing on a major race on Ohio ballots this year, which is for Ohio governor. The Ohio Republican Party has already endorsed one candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, well ahead of the party's primary elections, which will be held in May. Some voters, though, like military and people living overseas, can cast their ballots as soon as next month. Earlier in the show today, we heard my conversation with the Democratic frontrunner, Dr. Amy Acton. Next, we'll hear my conversation with Ramaswamy. Now, this interview was pre-recorded, so we can't take your calls, but you are always welcome to email us your thoughts. You can send those to soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. And now here's that interview with Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, candidate Ramaswamy, you have talked about your takeaways from the November election for the Republican Party, and you said two things. You said that Republicans need to focus on affordability and that they need to cut out identity politics. So how are you putting that into action in your campaign for governor for Ohio?
Well, the truth is, Stephanie, those are exactly the core pillars of what I'm running on, is reviving the American dream in our state. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. My parents grew up with not much, right? They traveled halfway around the world as legal immigrants. I went to public schools through 8th grade. But I've lived the American dream because of the education and the opportunities that I got in this state. And I'm in this to pass that same American dream on to our kids. Now, in order to do that, we need to put more money in the pockets of Ohioans, and we need to do it now. You know, to think about property tax relief, we're delivering that immediately, putting our state on a path in the long run to zero income taxation as well, so Ohioans can keep what they earn, but also bring down those electric bills, which have gone up 50, 60, 70% in many parts of Northeast Ohio this year over last year. We've got to produce more energy. So the essence of my campaign is focused not on necessarily what the national issues of the day are or the traditional Republican versus Democrat divides nationally. It's focused on what puts money in the pockets of Ohioans today, here and now, and to give our kids the opportunities to give them a good education so they can get a good job and not only afford the American dream, but thrive in this state by living the American dream. That's why I'm in this.
Let's talk about affordability for a moment here. A recent article in Forbes magazine estimated your assets to be worth about $1.8 billion, which is almost double what it was last year. I think those numbers are pretty close to tracking. A spokesperson from your team was quoted saying that seemed roughly right. Now, your competitor, Dr. Amy Acton on the Democratic side, she says that you don't have a concept of affordability because of your wealth. So how can you relate to Ohioans who are trying to decide whether to pay rent or buy groceries?
Well, the truth is I wasn't born with the silver spoon. My parents grew up in raised us in a humble background in Evendale, Ohio. The idea of attending public schools was a non-factor. We couldn't even consider affording that. I went to public schools through 8th grade, but I watched my parents work hard. My dad worked at GE for his entire life. My mom was a geriatric psychiatrist who took care of patients in the VA, worked in nursing homes in Southwest Ohio, and worked hard to give my brother and I a great education, which is the foundation. And that informs my view. Now I've gone on, thankfully, to found successful companies. And I believe that success is something that we should celebrate rather than villainize. Part of the way that I generated that wealth was by developing medicines for patients who needed them. One of the medicines that I oversaw was actually a life-saving therapy for kids with a congenital disease where 100% of those kids die by the age of 3 if they're untreated. And I'm proud to say my company developed a drug that is now FDA approved that allows those kids to live lives of a normal duration. We also addressed women's health conditions like endometriosis and uterine fibroids that the rest of the pharma industry had ignored. That's how you succeed in American capitalism. That's how you succeed in this country. And what I want for our state is I want every kid growing up in Ohio to have those same opportunities that I did. Is that available to kids growing up in the inner city of Cleveland or even in the inner city of Cincinnati? Not right now, they're not. When the inner city schools were closed during the COVID-19 pandemic for a year and a half, while private schools actually remained open. See, by the time I got to high school, I went to a private school. That school was closed for 5 days during the pandemic, while inner city schools were closed for over a year and a half. So one of the things I've noticed, Stephanie, is many of those who preach about inequality actually enact the policies that create the very inequality they complain about. But I'm in this to deliver solutions. And so I'm passionate to make sure that every kid who grows up with humble beginnings or middle class beginnings, as I did, is able to achieve even bigger things than I did in this state. And I don't think an ordinary politician is going to be able to deliver that. I do think it's going to be somebody who has that business experience to grow our economy, to understand what it takes to bring high-paying jobs back to our state. That is why I'm in this. I never grew up believing that I wanted to be a governor of a state. I'm not a politician, but I'm doing this because I want to give back to the state that allowed me to have these opportunities, and that motivates me.
One thing I do want to point out, because I do think it is an important distinction to make, is the schools weren't completely closed. They were operating remotely for that time, those inner city schools.
I mean, physically closed. The school buildings were physically closed. And the distinction that I draw is private schools were physically open. And there's a major difference now in the trajectory of kids who were sitting at home, supposedly learning on Zoom where there's no ability to track attendance in the same way, versus the kids in those private schools. That is a disparity where those kids in our public schools, those kids in Cleveland public schools, will never get that year and a half of their education back. Now, we can't change the past, and I'm not in this to play a blame game. But what I do want to do is learn from some of the mistakes of the past to make sure we're doing better for the future. And to your point, how can somebody like me relate? Well, I was one of those kids growing up in public schools for the first 8 years of my life in Evendale, Ohio. And I understand what it takes to achieve that American dream, starting with that foundation of education. I also think some of the problems we face are tough. I mean, you think about reducing and identifying areas of government waste and putting that back in people's pockets. I don't think ordinary politicians who grew up as bureaucrats or career politicians are able to do that. I do think it's going to take somebody who has a business-minded, practical mentality to bring down those property taxes, to put money back in the pockets of Ohioans, to have the path to license and cut red tape, to be able to move more quickly as a government, to produce more energy. That's how we bring down those electric bills. So to me, that's not about right versus left. This is about right versus wrong. This is about up versus down. And I'm choosing up for Ohio. And the fact that my own life trajectory has, thankfully in my 40 years, been upward, that's the same upward trajectory I want for every kid in this state.
Let's stay on the topic of private versus public school for just a minute.
Sure.
One of the big donors to the Victors Not Victims Political Action Committee, which is a supporter of your campaign, is Jeff Yass. He's of the Philadelphia area, gave $10 million to that organization. And he's a major supporter of expanding government spending on private education. What would you like to see happen here in Ohio? You talked a bit about public education and the disparities between the two. What would you like to see happen with public education here in Ohio?
So look, I can't speak to anybody else's vision. I can tell you about mine. So what my perspective is that we need a combination of school choice with added accountability and standards for our public schools to compete with the best of those alternatives. I'll tell you what I mean. I do think that every parent deserves the right to be able to choose where they send their kids to school. It's actually a progressive policy. It's going to be kids who grow up in poor urban environments who benefit from that added choice. But there's also good data showing that private schools, when you have school choice in that same area, the public schools tend to perform better because they're held to higher accountable standards. Now, one of my core areas of focus, which is not a traditional Republican talking point, but is my core focus in educational reform, is bringing standards back to public schools themselves. I say this as somebody who was positively impacted by my own public school upbringing. I had a teacher named Ms. Kinney in 6th grade. Tragically, she passed a couple of years ago, but she changed my life. She saw potential in me that others didn't, and she lit a fire under my feet to be able to work harder and achieve the things I did. Ms. Hendel, my first grade teacher, came out to a recent campaign event and surprised me recently. So I care about rewarding our public school teachers and incentivizing them to actually be able to attract the best next generation into the profession. But we have to do it with standards. What does that mean? We used to have the 3rd grade reading guarantee in Ohio. It was a simple policy that said that if you're medically capable, you should be able to read by the end of 3rd grade. And as long as you're medically capable, you're not going to 4th grade until you can. I think that's common sense because that's the point in a child's life where they make that special transition from learning to read to reading to learn. And if they never make that transition, their chance of achieving success in life, Stephanie, falls like a rock off a cliff. But if you make that transition by 3rd grade, by 4th grade, ideally earlier, but at least by the end of 3rd grade, your chance of achieving financial independence, graduating from high school, getting a job, and thriving as an adult go through the roof. So those early interventions, those early programs that really empower our kids through standards in our public schools, that's what I'm bringing back. Some people find that controversial. The third grade reading guarantee is not without controversy. It's why they got rid of it. It's why it got repealed. But I want to bring back those kinds of standards, civic education in high school. Look, I personally believe that every high school senior who graduates from an Ohio public high school should have to pass the same civics test that every legal immigrant has to pass before the immigrant becomes a voting citizen. Because you have to know something about your country, to be proud of your country, to be a citizen of your country in the most informed sense. And so that's what I aim to do, is elevate the standards of performance at our public schools, do it by celebrating the power of our public school teachers and incentivizing them. Even I think the entry-level pay for public school teachers should actually be higher than the $40,000 a year entry-level salary that we have now. But it's going to take all of us aligning on the importance of education for our kids to actually get there.
You mentioned healthcare and access to different health treatments and how instrumental that was for you in your position today. What do you say to Ohioans who are looking at either losing health insurance altogether or having to pay much higher premiums if the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits aren't extended before the end of the year?
So look, obviously we need thoughtful health reform in this country. Healthcare is too unaffordable, and frankly, health outcomes aren't good compared to how much we actually spend on healthcare itself. We need to bring down those healthcare bills. And I think one of the ways to do it is to think about how we actually put money in the pockets of Ohioans. There's many ways to do that from a policy standpoint. Federally, health savings accounts have been discussed. There are many sensible ways to do this, but I think the ultimate solution, Stephanie, comes from putting money in the pockets of Ohioans and to make sure that we also have a competitive healthcare system as well. So I do have some ideas. Most of those are federal issues, right? And so for our congressmen and our U.S. senators, that's an important area for them to focus on. My question is, what can I do from a state perspective to make everyday life more affordable? And I'm looking at bringing other ways of just putting money directly in the pockets of Ohioans, including through sensible healthcare measures that we'll be talking about over the course of the campaign. States can look at how we more effectively run Medicaid, about how we more effectively potentially consider strategies for bringing down prescription drug costs and either other healthcare expenses at a state level. I'm committed to that, but I also am very realistic about what I tell people we're going to do. What I say we're going to do in this campaign, we're going to deliver. Bringing down property taxes, bringing down those electric bills, bringing down the cost of housing by building more houses in our cities, cutting the income taxation burden over the long run. That puts money in the pockets of everyday Ohioans. And if we're able to supplement that with other ways that also allow them to actually afford their health care, think about those deductibles, think about those unexpected health expenses that in many cases, even private insurance isn't covering today. The best way we do that is by increasing the wealth and the health of Ohioans, and that's what I'm committed to.
Staying on the topic of public health for a moment,
Sure.
the latest data shows in Cuyahoga County, cocaine is now involved in more overdose deaths than opioids.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
What's your plan for helping Ohioans overcome substance abuse issues?
And I do think, Stephanie, that's the right way to look at this, is substance abuse issues overall, because we've seen opioids, fentanyl, cocaine, each taking their turn at the top. But the point is, why are especially a lot of young people turning to substance abuse and addiction in the first place? I think there's a deeper loss of conviction and purpose and meaning, especially amongst young people, a loss of conviction in their sense that they're able to work hard and get ahead. A lot of this starts in the schools. Think about the mental health epidemic. The earliest place for intervention is through prevention in our schools, understanding when someone's having a tough time, what does that actually look like? Bringing back, as I said, my mom was a psychiatrist, bringing back proper psychiatric care and alternatives so people don't turn to drug addiction. That's where I favor getting to the root causes. Sure, do we need to empower law enforcement in our cities to make sensible decisions that they're able to arrest violent criminals or arrest drug dealers? Absolutely. And I'm supportive of that, fully supportive of that. But that's not enough. We have to actually get to the root causes of mental health care and even mental health issues of prevention. And that's where I think our schools and frankly, even programs through supporting families can can play a much bigger role in our state. And that's where something I'm intensely focused on. My wife's a physician. She's a throat surgeon at Ohio State. And I hear from her all the time as well about the importance of early intervention and prevention. And that's something we're committed to both as a family as well as leaders of the state.
You mentioned they're arresting the people who are the offenders in these cases of the substance abuse here in Ohio. Now, given the increase in cocaine-related deaths that we've seen, what do you say to Ohioans who are questioning President Donald Trump's pardoning of former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who was found to be responsible for bringing more than 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S.
So look, I'm not paying attention to every pardon decision, nor am I in the room where those decisions are made. I'm focused on Ohio, okay? And I know that a lot of the national media, and even these days, even local media, wants to focus on national polarization. That's not where my focus is. A lot of the Democrats, even in the state, try to focus on issues that don't relate to Ohio. I have one mission in running for governor. How do we revive the American dream in Ohio? How do we put more money in the pockets of everyday hardworking Ohioans? And how do we give our kids the world-class education that I believe is the birthright of every kid born and raised in this state? That's where my laser focus is. A couple of years ago, I was more involved in national politics, but right now, I'm laser focused on what we can do to lift up the lives of Ohioans. And frankly, I think everything else, to me at least, as hopefully the next governor of the state, is a distraction.
Let's talk about polarization a bit here. I'm going to bring up a sensitive topic right now. Let's talk about the political activist Charlie Kirk just for a moment. And unfortunately was assassinated while speaking at Utah University just over 3 months ago. That was at an event organized by Turning Point USA, a conservative youth organization that he had founded. You had called Charlie one of your closest political friends in American politics. I want to say first, I'm very sorry for your loss of your friend.
It was more than my loss. It was a loss for our country.
Now, your competitor, Dr. Amy Acton from the Democratic side, she also got death threats during her time as the director of the Ohio Department of Health during the pandemic. So what do you think we need to do to bring down the temperature and stop political violence on all sides?
So look, I think the first thing is, as leaders, we have an obligation to state the obvious truth. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. And violence is never an acceptable response to words, period. Not in the United States of America. We're the country where, and even think about the Ohio that I grew up in, we would have neighbors, even friends, and even family members amongst our extended family, uncles, cousins, who would disagree vehemently at the dinner table, but we would still be at the dinner table at the end of it. That's the Ohio I grew up in. That's the America that I grew up in. And I will say in the social media-driven era, in the algorithmic era, we have lost that sense of common cause and unity. It's not going to be through agreeing on every issue. That's never going to happen. Okay, even most spouses don't agree on everything. Most family members don't agree on everything. How can we expect to agree on everything with our fellow citizens in a republic of 330 million people? That's never going to happen. But the beauty of this country is we have the freedom to express ourselves without fear of violence. And I don't care what side it comes from, you will always hear me condemning political violence. Part of my job as a governor is to set that tone. And look, I would say that that's the standard I'm aiming to hold myself to in this campaign. For people who have been following this campaign, you know, I'm not going to speak about my competitors, but I'll speak about the standards I hold myself to. Is to say that we're focused on what lifts up Ohioans. And frankly, I want to make sure that anyone running against me is every bit as safe and secure in their ability to express their viewpoints as I hope that I am able to as well. That's America at our best. And I think that should be one basic principle that unites all of us, regardless of our party.
Something else that's on the national conversation, but also a very big conversation here in Ohio, is gerrymandering. A Newsweek article from 2024 reported Ohio is among the 11 worst offenders for gerrymandering in the country. There was a proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot here in 2024 that did not pass. The current governor, Mike DeWine, said that the legislature should be tackling gerrymandering reform in Ohio. What's your take on it here?
Look, I think we need common sense approaches here. At the end of the day, to say that Ohio is one of the worst states in this regard, when you have people from both parties who have at least endorsed the approach that we've taken, I think makes this a bit of a sideshow relative to the issues that Ohioans actually care about. I'm in this to bring down costs and put money in the pockets of Ohioans. That's what matters. And, you know, look, I think a lot of people in what I sometimes call the chattering class, right, the D.C. political consultant circles, want to talk about all kinds of issues that don't actually matter to one key stakeholder group called the voters. And to me, that's what actually matters. And at this point in time, it is true that a lot of people feel like costs have gone up faster than wages over the last half decade in our country. But we got to deliver solutions. And to me, we have practical ways to put money back in your pocket. I'm focused on property tax reform. How do you bring down those property taxes immediately? How do you bring down the income tax eventually down to zero so you keep what you earn? How do we make housing more affordable? How do we bring down those electric bills? And in total, those numbers add up. I want Ohioans, and they will be, I believe by the end of my first year as governor, objectively, meaningfully wealthier than they are today. And that also gives them the ability to give their kids the self-confidence to get a great education, to stay in the state rather than to move somewhere else. Those are the issues that I'm focused on. And I do think that one of the risks of being in politics is you have social media on one side, drives us in the direction of political polarization. You have a lot of the consultant class and the Washington, D.C. politico types that will distract you with D.C.-centric issues or political-centric issues rather than the actual issues that make life better for everyday Ohioans. The reason I chose this office to run for is that I believe I can make a change. As somebody who's run successful businesses, as somebody who's managed a P&L, as somebody who has had to sign not just the back of a paycheck, but the front of a paycheck, I understand how we're going to put more of those dollars, more of those paychecks in the pockets of Ohioans. That's what I'm focused on. And frankly, I think that's priority number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 for me before anything else matters.
Talking about those priorities as we wrap this up, this will be our last question here. You've been traveling around the state. You've been to all 88 counties. You've met the voters. You've met people out there. What are they telling you, and how is that informing what your priorities are if you were to be elected governor of Ohio?
And thank you, Stephanie. One of my priorities is indeed listening. I mean, that 88 county tour this year, in this calendar year since I launched, we have visited in person all 88 counties, I think most of them multiple times over. And one of the things I love is talking to people who you don't meet in the usual political circles that maybe politicians run in. That includes Republicans. It also includes Democrats. And one of the hallmark features, favorite parts of my campaign was occasionally we would even have protesters outside of our campaign. And I made it a point that whenever it was practical, whenever it was feasible, we did something that was a little unusual. We went out and talked to the protesters. There was one woman I met, I will never forget this story, in Wayne County, Ohio, in May of this year. She approached me. She was upset. She was an older woman. She said, "Why are you cutting our veterans' benefits?" And I was shocked because we have no plan to do any such thing. I said, "Where did you hear that?" She paused for a second. She said, "I don't know. I think I heard it somewhere." And that's a summary of everything I think that's wrong with modern social media and modern media. I told her, "No, we're not cutting your veterans' benefits, but why don't you do this? Why don't you come in and join us at this Republican-focused event? You're a protester here outside. See what you think." And I give her a lot of credit. She came in. Everyone else is wearing a suit and a tie or a beautiful dress. She's got a sweaty T-shirt on a hot Saturday late afternoon, and she comes in Wayne County, Ohio, joins me at the head table in a room of 700 people where I'm speaking. I go up on stage, I'm speaking, and I'm keeping an eye on her over the course of the speech. And I give her a lot of credit because it's awkward to be her. But we ask everyone in the room, it turns out she was a Vietnam War veteran. We ask everyone in the room who's a veteran to stand up that night. About 30 people stood up. The entire room applauded. She started to get emotional. We called her up on stage, and I gave her the mic and said, "You got 2 minutes? You came here to be heard outside. We'll let you be heard inside this room tonight." You know what she said? By the end, she turned to the audience and said, "You know what? You all have changed my perspective on Republicans tonight." And I thought that was progress. I don't know if she's going to vote for me or not, but that's the culture, the political culture I want to bring back to our state. The issues are clear. On both sides of the aisle, people want their property taxes down, and they want to bring down their property taxes in a way that doesn't harm education but helps education. I'm confident I'm going to be able to deliver on both prongs of that. That's something we hear in all 88 counties. On one hand, we bring standards back to public education. On the other hand, we have a clear and distinct plan to reset property taxes back to what they were before the spike that they've encountered in the last half decade. To be able to do that while also putting money in the pockets of Ohioans by bringing down those electric bills and those housing costs, produce more energy and build more homes. That's the formula. I think at this moment in time, one of the things that I do see is people are hungry for somebody who comes from outside of the bureaucracy, somebody who isn't a bureaucrat, who isn't a career politician, who's actually created something of value in the real world. And for me, I've been blessed by the opportunities this state and this country have given me and my family. I'm in this to make sure that every one of our kids in their generation are able to achieve even bigger things than I did by staying right here in the state. And we've seen, thankfully, to record crowds at every place we've gone, a huge amount of energy behind that message. And now it's going to be up to us to deliver.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this conversation. Candidate Ramaswamy, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good to see you.
Again, that was party-endorsed Republican candidate for Ohio Governor Vivek Ramaswamy. You can find my conversation with both of the leading candidates for governor, including Dr. Amy Acton on the Democratic side, on today's show page at ideastream.org/SOI. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. You can also get every episode of The Sound of Ideas on demand wherever you get your podcasts and on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org or leave us a comment on Instagram. We are at The Sound of Ideas.